Welcome to The Secret Truth. I'm George Butler. Along with me this evening is Tony Gosling from Bristol, England. Welcome to our program, Tony Gosling.
Hi there, George. Thanks for having me on again.
Well, I tell you what, you've really been looking hard at this Russian gas poisoning, and now we have this Middle East war underway. What do you think, Tony?
It's been a proxy war since 2011, since Gaddafi was defeated. Gaddafi was executed. Gaddafi was executed with a bayonet up the backside by a mob, and that was the way that NATO decided that he should end his life, for showing, I suppose, because Gaddafi effectively put two fingers up to imperialism, shipped out of the country in a bloodless coup the puppet leaders of Libya, and that was the way Libya ended. But then there was all these fighters, mercenaries in the employ of the West, through all sorts of covert channels, a lot of it through Saudi Arabia, a lot of it through Swiss banks like UBS, funding these people, giving them their salaries, etc. And so they were then shipped over to Syria. At that point, I think what we had was, they're still calling it a civil war, all the time on the Western mainstream press. And that fundamental description of what's been happening since 2011 in Syria is a flat, blatant military lie being told to the public in order to simply deceive people as to what's really been going on in Syria.
Right, exactly. I have a friend that's on the Democratic side, and this morning we were talking about this, and I said, yeah, hold it just a second. Hillary and Obama got us into both Libya and Syria. See what I mean? And
I met the guy who funded both of those.
Right.
The bag man, I suppose you'd call him, the guy that was sort of follows the gang of criminals around with a big bag of cash, which will help them out in various situations if they smash somewhere up to give some money to the guy that owns it. And that was James A. Johnson, former Goldman Sachs director. And I met him at the Bilderberg conference. He was the guy that funded the campaigns for both Hillary and Obama. So these people really should be being exposed all the time for the last 10, 20, 30 years by our mainstream press. The people who basically are the employers of our senior politicians, the people who put up the money to get them in office, of course expect something in return, George.
Right. You know, it's a big money pyramid, isn't it, Tony? You've been looking at this for a number of years, and boy, gosh, you're giving some insights now that are right on. You know, you're right on top of this.
I hope so. I mean, this latest development, which is these military strikes, I think is to me, it's not totally unexpected, but I would just say one thing. I mean, what annoys me more than anything else, George, is some of the most obvious questions, the sort of things that will be in the back of many people's minds, in the front of their minds maybe, as they've had a few pints tonight down the local pub here across Britain, in the cities, in the countryside. Questions will be in people's minds. Questions will be being discussed. People will be scratching their heads. These are the questions that are not being asked in the mainstream press at all in the West. And this is the journalist's job to ask these questions, to raise these questions. One, for example, is we've seen apparently 3 different chemical weapons facilities bombed last night. Now, does it make sense to bomb chemical weapons facilities? That's question number one. Or nuclear facilities. Does it make sense to bomb these things? And does it not make sense, first of all, to show to the world that it is a nuclear facility, to show to the world that it is, you've got evidence that it is a chemical weapons facility? What would happen if you've got a concentration of chemical weapons that then a smart bomb arrives in the middle of it, George?
Right, exactly. You could kill thousands in the area, right? And
you've got no idea how many people you could kill, and it depends which way the wind's blowing as to how many people die. Now, this has not been asked at all by the press, and of course it should have been right across the world. I'm sure in some parts of the world it is being asked, is this a wise thing to do? Of course it's not a wise thing to do. It's a reckless thing to do. And I think really what it does, it just indicates how incredibly reckless the leadership of the West, and effectively we're talking really about NATO here, plus Israel, obviously Israel's a major player. They've been the first country to pat Trump, to pat Theresa May and pat Macron on the back and say, well done, after last night's attack. And in fact, they were the spearhead. Last weekend we saw they were the first people to react to this alleged chemical attack by bombing from the Lebanese airspace, by sending missiles into an Iranian, what I think was an Iranian airbase in the middle of Syria. So this is Israeli-led, this whole project, and they're using their political might, the political clout of AIPAC and people like that. And we've got the same thing here in Britain. We've got effectively Conservative Friends of Israel, this kind of thing, Labour Friends of Israel, millions of pounds being spent by the Israeli embassy in the Labour Party, bribing people to go along with the Israeli line, and also to try and, as I said, last year was revealed by Al Jazeera, actually remove the defence minister from power because he wasn't 100% behind Israel. That sort of action in Britain has now paid off militarily for the Israelis. But that's actually, I think, really what's behind this. It's the Israel lobby right across the Western world that really stands to benefit, because they're the neighbours of Syria, and they're the ones that actually, they don't really feel threatened, I don't think, by the Syrians, but they would like to establish their control over the Golan Heights. This is one thing, for example, with the Murdoch Empire, Fox News over there, the Sky News, we've got obviously the major newspapers in Britain, the Sun and the Times, other newspapers around the world, in Israel, for example, Murdoch controlled. Murdoch also has a massive stake in Genie Oil, which is this company which has concessions in the Golan Heights, the occupied Golan Heights.
Yes, exactly.
So there you can see, here is a media empire which has got a major interest in the Western powers coming in to subdue one of Israel's neighbours, whom Israel has stolen land from and has now got oil concessions on that land. So, I mean, none of this, of course, is being dissected by the mainstream press at all. Also, of course, no votes in Parliament here in the UK, or I don't think over there in the Congress or the Senate either, to back this action, and no votes at the UN Security Council to back it either. So it is the act of criminals, of war criminals, the same sort of war criminals that brought us Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction there. It's a very similar sort of case, George, I think, isn't it? Of weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. They love to say this, and on the BBC's main Question Time programme, we had a plucky young lad from Liverpool saying, look, we know you're making this up. You're not going to pull the wool over our eyes a second time. We've seen this all in Iraq, and that was on national television last Thursday evening.
Right, exactly. Robert Perry, he passed away now, but he wrote an article that implicated a secret base out of Jordan on last year's attack in Syria, a gas attack.
I would suggest there is a very good reason why these attacks are happening at exactly the same time as last year. And that is because the British Parliament is in a recess. The British are on holiday over the Easter holidays, and they have a couple of weeks of recess in the British Parliament. So it would mean recalling Parliament. Theresa May could easily have done that. The Liberal Democrats, leader Vince Cable, and the Labour leader, and Jeremy Corbyn, and the Scottish National Party, the three main parties in Westminster, opposition parties, all demanded recall Parliament, but Theresa May just simply ignored them. Now remember, she's a Prime Minister who's running a minority government, just with a handful of DUP, Ulster, Democratic Unionist Party MPs propping up a government on an incredibly thin minority. She's running this country, so she hasn't got a mandate from the country, neither has she got a mandate from the Conservative Party, because she was never elected as the leader of the Conservative Party. This is why thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of Conservatives are simply not renewing their membership at the moment, because they've got no confidence that the party is representing their interests at all, with a leader that they haven't been given a chance to elect since David Cameron left.
Right. Syria invited in the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to DOMA to examine that, and my complaint about Trump was he should have waited longer than he did. You know, he went too early on this.
The whole point of these operations is as Naomi Klein would describe it, they're these kind of shock doctrine the idea is that you show people very graphic images on the TV,
right.
These unverified. If you look in the small print at the bottom of the television screen, sometimes it actually is shoved off the bottom of the screen and you're not allowed to see it. It says unverified footage. And that is this footage of young children having water poured over their heads. Well, who's to say whether they're actually suffering from any kind of chemical weapons attack at all there? And also, most importantly, there is this completely counter-narrative which has not been described in the Western press whatsoever, which is the Jaish al-Islam terrorist group, which captured a whole bunch of Alawite prisoners. They were the last terrorists holding out in eastern Damascus, in eastern Ghouta. And all the other terrorists had decided to give up and get the buses and go. They were the only lot left, and they had a whole load of, they ran around 200 hostages. And it looks pretty obvious and pretty clear, if you bother to look, that these were the hostages, and many of whom had died in various different horrible, horrific circumstances, the bodies of which were put on display as part of this film which was shown on the TV and supposedly blamed on a WMD attack by Assad. And also, Jaish al-Islam, this group, the Army of Islam, they have shown to have used chemical weapons 2 years ago in 2016 against the Kurds. So there's a precedent for that same group that was in the area at the time already using chemical weapons. Now, I don't know if the UN inspection is going to, an examination, an investigation is going to really get to the bottom of this fast, but I can tell you, that's my conclusion, is it's these same terrorists who used chemical weapons before who used them. So the idea is they've got to have a quick rush, as you said.